the text that's written in the undertext, the erased text that you were able to decipher, that is even more interesting because it is...
It is New Testament in Christian Palestinian Aramaic. There we go.
And it's the New Testament written in a dialect of Aramaic, which would have been the dialect that Jesus spoke. Shalom and welcome to Hebrew Voices. I am here once again with Dr. Kim Phillips, who is a research fellow at the Institute for Hebrew Bible Manuscript Research. He teaches Hebrew at University of Cambridge and has for the last decade. He's also now recently become the host of the Hebrew Bible YouTube channel with Kim Phillips. We're going to post a link to that on nehemiaswall.com. And what we're going to talk about today is his recently published book on, and I hope I can pronounce this, Codex Climaci Rescriptus. Shalom, Kim.
Hi, good to see you, Nehemia. Great to be with you again.
Thanks for joining us, Kim. Kim, what is Codex Climaci? Can you say it for us?
Codex Climaci Rescriptus, yeah.
So what is that?
So it's a good question. What it is in the, say, a year 1000 is a codex written on parchment consisting of around about 150 folia, so about 300 pages, containing a Syriac translation of John Climacus's book, The Ladder of Divine Ascent, or Hey Climax in Greek.
Okay.
So
there's a lot of terms to define there, but I'm gonna let you keep going.
I'm
making notes here.
Okay. So in effect, let's say around about the year 1000, it is a book written containing two very, very famous, very popular at the time works on Christian discipleship, written in Syriac, which is translated from Greek.
Tell us what Syriac is.
Syriac is the most important language you've never heard of, probably.
Well, I mean, I've heard of it, but I think some of my audience hasn't.
Yeah, of course.
Or if they heard of it, what they heard is that the New Testament was originally written in Syriac. And I want you to give your opinion as someone with a PhD from the University of Cambridge. What is your view on that?
Okay.
Jesus spoke Syriac. That's what I hear all the time. And the Peshitta is the original New Testament. Have you heard that?
I've heard it, yes.
Okay.
I've heard it. I don't think it's right, but it's got enough kind of half or quarter truths in it to mean that it's a kind of myth that persists.
Okay.
So,
and I think there was someone named George Lamza who popularized that idea about several decades ago.
I'll take your word for it.
Okay.
Right.
All right. Anyway, go on.
Sure. All the evidence points to the New Testament having originally been written in Greek, which makes sense. It's the lingua franca of the entire Levant region. It's the language that got out to the most people as quickly as possible. So logically, we would expect Greek. And in terms of the manuscripts, I mean, the earliest ones we have are Greek. There's no two ways about it. Jesus, though, yes, would have spoken a dialect of Aramaic. It's an open question still how much Greek he spoke. Some people actually have recently argued, Pete Williams at Tyndale House has recently argued that Jesus actually could have been fairly fluent in Greek growing up where he grew up. And just the context of the land of Israel, Palestine as a whole at the time. Open question there, but one thing is fairly certain, that he would have spoken Aramaic and Hebrew. That's pretty clear.
He would have also spoken Hebrew?
Well, he would have read his Bible in Hebrew. So we've got various narratives in the New Testament of him reading bits of scripture. Very famous instance where he stands up and reads from the scroll of Isaiah. Yes, I see absolutely no reason to think that, not to think that he would have read that in the Hebrew that would have been natural to him. Yeah.
Okay. So where does Syriac fit into this?
Yeah.
So
okay.
Syriac is this is like one of these syllogisms. Syriac is Aramaic. Jesus spoke Aramaic. Therefore, Jesus spoke Syriac.
Yes.
Right?
Is that? Yeah. So when you think Aramaic, Aramaic covers a huge geographic area, vast geographic area, which you can broadly split into East and West. And so East, we're thinking areas nowadays, sort of kind of Iran, Iraq, and further up into even over into Turkey, up into Syria. And then West, we're thinking obviously land of Israel kind of area. And scholars tend to divide Aramaic as a single language into its Eastern and Western dialects. So a dialect just means a variety of the language, which would probably be just about comprehensible to one speaker speaking to one of the others. But nonetheless, they've got substantial linguistic differences. So Syriac is a variety of Eastern Aramaic, even though Syriac is sort of itself divided into Western and Eastern varieties. But that's another story.
Just to make life interesting.
Yeah, exactly. But the point is for us that Jesus, and growing up in Galilee, he would have spoken a variety of Aramaic, probably close to it's called Galilean Aramaic today. That's one of the Jewish dialects. Jewish Palestinian Aramaic is one of the dialects that is better known.
Tell me what the term Jewish Palestinian means. There's a lot of confusion today because of certain geopolitical issues, which we as scholars we probably try not to get into. But what is Jewish Palestinian Aramaic? Is that what documents do we have that are in Jewish Palestinian Aramaic? Let's start with that.
Okay, so some very, very significant documents. The Targum Onkelos, for example, the most famous Aramaic translation of the Torah, is written in a dialect of Aramaic, which is very much Western land of Israel Aramaic, even though it was then transmitted over in Babylon, in other words, Iran, Iraq, and therefore it's got also little mixtures of this Eastern dialect as well. But yeah, so the Aramaic of the Targumim is a kind of classic staple of this Western Aramaic, and it's that sort of Aramaic that Jesus would have spoken, a dialect like that.
So if you read Targum Onkelos, that maybe is something like what he would have spoken or understood at the very least. Interesting.
Yeah.
So wow. All right. So and you said Syriac. So the Aramaic of Onkelos is what you call JPA, Jewish Palestinian Aramaic. All right. So he would have spoken something like that in the first century, and that's what people probably would have spoken. You're saying, and I know there's whole kinds of controversies. Let's not get into that. Where does Syriac fit into that? And here's where we're moving towards something which is very shocking, that Kim Phillips here worked on a manuscript written in the script of Syriac, but not the language of Syriac. That's. I think we're getting to that, right?
Yes, eventually. Yeah.
All right. So tell us what Syriac is.
Okay.
So do Jews speak Syriac?
Let's now, for simplicity, say no. Although actually somebody has recently published an article from the Geniza containing Judeo-Syriac, rather.
Wow.
But that's definitely the exception rather than the rule.
Okay.
No, Syriac is the dialect of Aramaic that became a huge dialect for the Christian church in Syria. It's geographically still understood roughly as the Syria that we think of today.
And wasn't it focused in a particular region or city? Help me out here.
Yes,
I want to say it's Edessa or Emissar. I'm always confusing those.
Yes, Edessa is one of the very key centers. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Okay. So Syriac is roughly at least associated with the dialect of Edessa.
Yes.
Which is that today in Turkey, or is that still northern Syria?
That's an excellent question. I've no idea.
One of those things. It probably depends on the day of the week. But anyway, let's move on.
Yeah.
Okay, so Syriac is different from the Aramaic spoken in Galilee and northern Israel, so-called Jewish Palestinian Aramaic. So I once asked a scholar of Syriac, I said, okay, if I had like one paragraph and I couldn't rely on script, right? Because Syriac's written in a different script usually than Hebrew, but let's say it was written in the Hebrew script. What would be like one dead giveaway? What would be your answer to that? Like if I had like 3 verses or something, 3 sentences, what would be like a linguistic characteristic that would immediately jump out? And your answer might be different.
Yeah. Well, the one that springs to mind most readily is to do with the imperfect verb. So in Western Aramaic, so the Aramaic of Targum Onkelos, if I wanted to say he will write, I would start that with a yih, yichtuv or yichtov.
That's exactly the answer I got. So I just wanted to see if it was the same answer.
Okay.
He said, immediately you will know that this is Syriac if it begins with a
nun instead. So nechtuv is it sounds very odd to somebody who's used to Hebrew and to Western Aramaic, but
really almost all other Semitic languages, right? Meaning like one of the feature of Semitic languages is in what we call what layman calls the future form, what you're calling the imperfect. Well, that's a whole complicated discussion. So normally you have the Eitan letters, Aleph, Yud, Tav, Nun. Aleph is I, Yud is he, Tav is you or she, and Nun is we. But in Syriac, Nun is also he.
Is he, yeah.
Wow,
yeah.
okay.
So you see nechtuv, and it could be he will write or we will write. You mean?
So it's ambiguous. So that's a characteristic of Syriac. Okay, so it's hard to confuse them even if they're both written in the same script. At least if you have enough,
as long as you've got enough text,
right? As long as you have enough text.
Obvious.
If you have 2 words, then you probably might not know. But okay, depending on what the words are. All right, fair enough.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
So all right, beautiful. So Syriac is the language used by Christians.
Yeah.
So how does this? So the manuscript you worked on, and it's 2 manuscripts, isn't it? Am I right about that? Or 2?
Well, I only told you about the manuscript by the year 1000.
Right.
That's the manuscript after it's
I'm
been
jumping
rewritten.
ahead. So John Climacus, who was a Syriac-speaking Christian and wrote in Syriac at least?
Yeah, so he was the abbot of St. Catherine's Monastery.
Oh, wow.
Oh gosh, I want to say sometime around the 7th, 8th century, something like that.
So this is this isn't his manuscript he wrote personally, but it's a copy from a couple hundred years later or so. Okay.
Yeah, so he wrote in Greek, and it was translated into Syriac.
Okay. So this is a Syriac translation of John Climacus. Okay, exactly. From the year 1000 roughly.
There
all right. But are manuscripts of that rare, or are there a whole bunch of manuscripts of that?
No, to the best of my knowledge, it's a well-known text. As I said, there is another little text there, but the main bulk of the work is the Ladder of Ascent. I know that I think is a real staple of the early Christians. Yeah.
Okay, so and early Christians, are you still talking the 7th or 8th century? Not
yeah. So sorry, I mean that in a very general sort of first.
Okay, fair enough.
Kind of
right.
Way.
So the name of this document is Codex Climaci Rescriptus.
Yes.
So it's the Rescriptus that we're interested in. So let's get to that.
That's the big deal with this manuscript. Yeah.
Okay. So tell us about that.
Okay. So
and Rescriptus, if I had a guess, not being an expert in Latin, would mean something like rewritten.
Precisely right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Absolutely. So if we track backwards in time from say the year 1000. We can imagine the scribe sitting down sometime in the 900s, maybe copying out the Ladder of Divine Ascent in Syriac. There we are. But he had to get hold of that parchment. So he goes to the shuk, probably somewhere in the land of Israel, and he buys the parchment. That parchment is itself recycled, not in the sense that it was pulped down and mashed together like we think of recycling nowadays, but it had been written on before for earlier books that were made in the 6th century. Those books were used for a couple of centuries, and then for whatever reason they were discarded, thrown out, and the parchment itself was scraped clean, and the book was dismantled, and then those freshly cleaned sheets were sold in the shuk, and our scribe comes along and starts writing his new book on those recycled bits of parchment.
And he doesn't know it was written there before and doesn't care because he doesn't see it, right? He just wants, maybe he's on a budget and so he's buying reused parchment. I don't know. Or maybe he doesn't know it's reused.
The question of does he know whether it was reused? That's I suspect he probably does, because the process of erasing a text, which was done by scraping, washing and scraping, causes quite a lot of damage to the parchment itself.
And you here sent me a graphic I'm going to share, and hopefully you can explain.
Yeah, that might help us to...
Actually, before we get to that, there's a big fancy word that I want you to explain what it means. Palimpsest.
Okay.
What is a palimpsest?
It just means written again. It's a manuscript consisting that has been written again, or written
And guys,
twice.
here's the really big thing. Kim spent years deciphering the erased text and was able to read things that, in some cases, that nobody read before. Or at least if they did, they didn't tell us. So let's share the screen here. All right. So this is actually a graphic that was made for you by ChatGPT. So we're like in 21st century material here, guys.
Yeah, so I had a nice conversation with ChatGPT earlier today, and it did pretty good. So image number one, those are our codices, books that were written in, let's say around about the year 600, roughly speaking. Let's just or 550 if you like. Those are the books that we're really interested in. They're the earlier books. They're going to have the original writing, and they're going to be the material that we want to reconstruct as best we can. But we don't have access to those books in their entirety. We only have access to them via this palimpsest. So after being used for, as I said, who knows, a century or two, those books are then sold for scrap. And so image two, they are dismantled and the separate leaves are piled up. And then image three, you can see somebody there scraping off what was originally written so that the parchment becomes nearly fresh and new. And so there you can see in image four, it's being sold in the market by our scribe who wants to sit down and write the ladder of divine ascent sometime around about the year 1000. In image five, I don't think they had scissors back then, but they must have had some means of...
But according to ChatGPT, they did, so...
Yeah, well, there you go. Yeah. So, you heard it here
well,
first.
in the Tanakh, we have the reference to the Tal HaSofer, the scribe's razor, so presumably something like that.
Yeah. So they've definitely got... they've got means of trimming the parchment leaves, because if you think back to... images 1 and 2, there's no reason to think that all of those books were the same shape or size. So in image 2, those bits of parchment are definitely not going to be the same size. They're going to vary. So one of the first jobs that the scribe needs to do when he's freshly bought his big pile of parchment is to trim it so that all of those leaves then become one size. And then finally, stage 6, he is ready to sit down and write in Syriac, the ladder of divine ascent. I'm not very impressed with ChatGPT's picture of Syriac there, but in general, I think it's done a great job.
Did you tell it that it was supposed to be Syriac?
I did, yeah.
Okay, it looks more like a barbaric form of Hebrew, like that maybe is a nun or something.
Yes, yeah.
All right.
There we go.
He does what he knows how to do.
Yeah, exactly.
All right.
Yeah.
So the palimpsest is a rewritten work, and here's the exciting thing, guys, that, as I said, Dr. Phillips deciphered this erased text. How did you decipher it when it was scraped off, or could you only decipher it when it was washed off? That's a question.
So it's a process. It really is. I think the short answer is you decipher it with blood, sweat, and tears. It's
fair enough.
It's excruciating, to be honest.
Oh, wow.
But to give a more useful answer, two things. Over time, even though the ink has been erased, if it's carbon iron gall ink, then it will continue to sort of go brown. So actually, when I looked at the manuscript in the year 2015 when I started working on it.
Oh wow! So you've been working on this for 10 years?
Yeah. Now you put it that way, yes.
Oh wow!
On and off, not continuously.
Okay. Still impressive.
Painful. Yeah. So probably in 2015 and subsequently, I could see more with the naked eye than was visible to the scribe back in the year 1000 when he's sitting down, because as I say, the traces that were left of that iron gall ink that the original scribe wrote with will have gone brown or browner over time, and so have sort of become slightly visible.
I see.
But
when he wrote it, he saw fewer traces, you think, than what you're seeing today. Okay, that's good. That's good.
That's my
that's
hunch.
good for us.
Yeah. Yes. It's an advantageous byproduct of using iron gall ink. Yeah.
Okay.
The great help is when you can look at the manuscript under different types of light. So I'm not the first person to have deciphered palimpsests by a country mile. It's a discipline that's been going on for centuries, and for a long time, people have known that if you look at a manuscript under ultraviolet light, that can sometimes help reveal the text that is otherwise difficult to see. And certainly when the second person to edit this text, a very, very competent scholar called Christa Moller-Kessler, came to Cambridge to look at the manuscript, because it ended up in Cambridge. We can talk about that if you like. She deciphered it using an ultraviolet lamp. We were able to go a step further, though, and enlist the help of a team of multispectral imaging experts. So we should probably get into that.
That's cutting edge stuff, Guy. MSI, multispectral imaging.
Yeah, they really took it to the next level. Yeah.
Wow. What is explain what multispectral imaging is?
So as far as I understand, and I sometimes think after 10 years of working with them, I should know a bit better. But anyway, they take photographs of each of the pages under different sorts of light, all the way from infrared to ultraviolet. And those then become the raw images. And then they can combine those images in clever ways so that they can enhance the undertext, make it just easier to see. They can change the color of the undertext to make the contrast stand out a bit more, to make it easier to see. In some cases, they can even make it look as though they've erased the called the superior text, the text written on top, so that you can see more of the text written underneath. So the process of taking those images in different spectra, in different wavelengths of light, and then the process of digitally processing those images to put various different images on top of each other and together, that whole process is called multispectral imaging. I really hope I've not just
that sounds correct.
An entire branch of science.
So one of the technical sides of it is that there are tannins in the ink, and even if you can't see those tannins with the naked eye, under certain wavelengths of ultraviolet light, they become more visible. And of course, there's what you call the upper ink or the superior ink, you're calling it. And that may have different wavelengths that it's visible in, or it's visible in invisible light, right? And so you're kind of bringing out the lower layer. Yeah, that's it's amazing stuff. I've looked at stuff where, like, of course, I'm looking mostly at Hebrew manuscripts, and they're where, like, they erased something and we can read what's been erased, and there's nothing visible to the naked eye, and we can actually read it. Now we know what it says because it's the Bible, right? So it's not like a huge surprise, but in the case of what I'm working on, we're at least confirming what our speculation is about what it should say. In your case, we don't even know what it says, and you're able to decipher it and read it. So what is the lower text in the Clamaki Rescriptus? What do you call the lower text?
I call it the undertext.
The undertext.
But yeah, lower text. Whatever.
No, I mean, what is the tell everybody what the content is, because that to me is very exciting.
Sure. So
because honestly, I don't really care about the ladder of ascension. That's not my field of interest. But what you have in the undertext is very exciting to me.
Could you bring back up the ChatGPT's version of those of the process? And I can talk with that there.
Absolutely. Here we go. Yes.
There we go. Yeah, great. Thank you. So in ChatGPT's version, there are 6 original books. Actually, for Codex Clinici Rescriptus, there are bits of, and I emphasize bits of 11 original books,
Okay.
4 of which were written in Greek, and 7 of which were written in this dialect of Aramaic, Christian Palestinian Aramaic. So the dialect of Aramaic spoken by the Christian community in and around Jerusalem in, say, the 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th centuries.
Is that the same as Syriac?
No, this.
No, this is important. This is where we wanted to get to for the, when we were talking about Syriac, guys. This is what we were aiming for.
Yeah.
So now we have the Aramaic spoken by Jews in let's call it northern Israel, Galilee, and other places. We have the Aramaic spoken in Edessa and by Christians around the Middle East. And then we have a different dialect, CPA, Christian Palestinian Aramaic. What is that?
So we spoke briefly earlier about the dialect of Aramaic spoken by, or that Targum Onkelos has been translated into, Jewish Palestinian Aramaic, and Jewish Palestinian Aramaic and Galilean Aramaic and Christian Palestinian Aramaic are all just varieties, and Samaritan Aramaic are all varieties of Aramaic spoken in the west part of the Middle East. So let's say in the sort of Mediterranean region.
So the Aramaic that your undertext is written in, that you deciphered over the last 10 years, is closer to the Aramaic that Jesus spoke, according to your understanding, than the Syriac, than the Peshitta translate, or the Peshitta text of the New Testament.
Yes,
right?
No doubt about it.
Okay.
Yeah, unless Jesus originated from several hundred miles further east than we have originally thought. No two ways about it. He grew up in Galilee, so his Aramaic would have been very similar to the Aramaic in Targum Onkelos and the Aramaic that we now call CPA. Yeah.
Okay, CPA, Christian Palestinian Aramaic. We'll put that up on the screen. By the way, so were you done with this image, or was there something else you want to show us here?
So I was just going to say that the one book that we ended up with, the one Codex Clinici Scriptus, actually originates from bits of 11 earlier books. And we're particularly interested in just 2 of those earlier books, 2 out of the 7 that were written in Christian Palestinian Aramaic.
And I imagine other scholars dealt with the other 5 and all the Greek stuff. Am I right? Or maybe they're not that interesting.
I've dealt with 4 out of the 7 of the CPA, and I've got a work in progress on another one.
Wow!
And I think
you're continuing to work on that material. So what is in the book that you just came out with, and guys, we're going to put a link up on my website to the book, nehemiaswall.com. And guys, this book you can download it for free. It's from Open Publishers, I believe it's called.
Yeah, Open Book Publishers.
Open Book Publishers. And it's a free download. Now, if you want a print copy, you can probably order and pay for a print copy, but most people are probably just going to download it. Guys, go download this book. It's absolutely fascinating. I was looking at some, what is the text? You haven't told us what the text is.
Sorry. Yeah.
That's the exciting thing. Because like I said, I could almost care less about the ladder of ascent or whatever. Yeah. And I don't know that you're that interested in it either. Maybe you are. I don't know.
In my personal life, yes.
Okay, fair enough. But the text that's written in the undertext, the erased text that you were able to decipher, that is even more interesting because it is...
It is New Testament in Christian Palestinian Aramaic. There we go.
And it's the New Testament written in a dialect of Aramaic, which would have been the dialect that Jesus spoke. And again, there's debates on this. I mean, according to Kim here, guys, you don't have to agree with him. But according to Dr. Phillips and many other scholars, this is the dialect, or closer to the dialect at least, right? It's almost like we would say, and this might be lost in some of the audience, it'd be like if somebody spoke Danish and he met somebody who spoke Swedish and they could understand each other, and we said they spoke Scandinavian. And then somebody were to say like, oh, well, the Swedish guy, that's the same as what the Danish guy spoke. No, it's 2 different languages. But in Aramaic, we call those dialects. And the joke is that, the definition of a dialect, have you heard this one? Or the definition of a language versus a dialect.
Okay.
So, and this was Max Weinreich, who is the great scholar of Yiddish, and he was talking about Yiddish. He said a language is a dialect with a navy and an army.
Yeah, oh, that sounds
right. Meaning there's some, so the
right.
difference really between, let's say, and I don't know Norwegian or Swedish or anything like that, but I'm told Norwegian and Swedish are so close to each other, they can have a conversation each speaking in their own language. Danish is a little bit more complicated, I'm told. Right. And so, but we consider them different languages because there's different countries. Well, in the Aramaic sense, there weren't different countries. So we call all of them Aramaic, even though, and this is a question I have for you. If somebody from, let's say, from Galilee met somebody from Babylon in the 1st century CE, would they understand each other like a Swede and a Dane? Or they would think, well, that guy kind of talks funny, but I can understand what he's saying. Well, do you have some sense of what the relationship was?
My hunch is that if they wrote to each other, then they would think that each of them were making quite a lot of grammatical errors, but nonetheless, they would have understood each other pretty well. A word here and there would have not sat, but they'd have been able to make out the gist. Okay. As to if they spoke to one another, then you're getting into all sorts of sort of phonology, and that gets really complicated, and I am in no way expert enough to come up with any sort of judgment on that.
Okay, fair enough. And if okay, that answers the question. All right, so the New Testament, written in a dialect of Aramaic, which is spoken by Christians, but it's very close to the Aramaic that would have been spoken in northern Israel in the 1st century. It's part of the same family, let's say, right? Yes, maybe it's like different dialects of Norwegian or something, right? I don't know.
Yeah, very close. So demonstrably closer to Galilean Aramaic, Jewish Palestinian Aramaic, Christian Palestinian Aramaic. They're all basically varieties of the same language, whereas Syriac over in the east feels quite different in all sorts of ways. And we've spoken.
So how do you explain? And you don't have to have an answer, but is there an explanation of why Christians in the area of Jerusalem, and what did we say, the 4th or 5th century, or you said 550? So Christians in the 6th century are speaking a language closer to Jews in that region than the Christians are in that region to Christians, in Edessa, right? Like you said, a few hundred miles. So why is that? Sure. Do we have some idea of why that is? Or?
Well, I think if you grow up in a region, you speak the language. It's as simple as that.
Okay.
And the language that is spoken in the Levant region is Aramaic. Well, Greek obviously is the kind of imperial language, but Aramaic. And so the Christian element of Christian Palestinian Aramaic really comes down more to the type of texts that you find in the dialect, and every now and then a sort of more theological word, which is suitable for Christianity and less suitable for Judaism, and vice versa.
All right, so the New Testament in Christian Palestinian Aramaic, how much of the New Testament were you able to decipher in the Codex Climaci Scriptus?
Sure. So just to remind you, we're only interested in 2 of the 11 earlier manuscripts that eventually made their way into Climaci Scriptus.
So there's actually 2 different texts and 2 different manuscripts that are the source, and they're both New Testament in Christian Palestinian Aramaic?
Yeah. So of those, remember, there are 7, if you like, books from the year 550, which are then dismantled, and parts of those then get used in Climaci Scriptus centuries later. One of those books is a copy of the Gospels. That's called CCR1, and I published that in Aramaic Studies, and that's also open access, so listeners can just download.
We'll put a link there as well. What does CCR stand for?
Codex Climaci Scriptus.
Okay, CCR1. All right.
CCR1.
Beautiful.
CCR7 is just 2 pages of Leviticus in CPA, Christian Palestinian Aramaic, and those I published those, and they are just about to come out in the Journal of Semitic Studies, also open access, so listeners can also go there and download that.
All right.
I particularly enjoyed that one because most of my work is done in Hebrew Bible Old Testament, and so to be able to work on Leviticus in CPA was a real treat. And there's hardly any Leviticus. I think there's maybe one or two extra leaves, but basically the Leviticus that I was deciphering there was our only witness to Leviticus in Christian Palestinian Aramaic. But we're not interested in that. We're interested in CCR 2 and CCR 11. Okay. CCR 2 is a copy of the Pauline epistles, and CCR 11 is a copy of the Book of Acts plus what are either called the general epistles or the Catholic epistles. But we're talking about Peter, Jude, James, and the letters of John. And those are what we'd refer to as the general epistles.
CCR 2 was the Pauline epistles or 11?
CCR 2 is Pauline epistles, yeah. CCR 11 is, well, actually,
Acts,
until I started the work, people didn't realize they were two separate manuscripts.
Oh, wow.
It was only
so that's one of your discoveries.
Half mine, I would say. We can get into.
So for the audience who's not familiar, maybe we have some Jews listening who have never heard of the Catholic epistles. I know this is a loaded question, but so what is the relationship between the Roman Catholic Church and the Catholic epistles?
Oh gosh!
In other words, what does the word Catholic mean in this context?
In this context, it just means that they were written for. Rather than being written to a specific group, they're written for the churches more broadly.
Okay.
So it's nothing to do with anything partisan in Catholic Protestant divides, nothing like that. These are, as I say, the letters of Peter, James, Jude, John. They're in everybody's New Testament.
Okay. So and there's an irony that. And correct me if I'm wrong, isn't it the Nicene Creed that mentions the Catholic Church? But it doesn't mean what we call the Catholic Church today. It means actually like just the universal church or something like that, right?
Yes, that's right. Yes, the Nicene, and I think the Apostles' Creed even earlier talks about the Holy Catholic Church. Yeah.
Right, but which it doesn't mean the Roman Catholic Church. It's probably confusing for an outsider like me.
Yeah, and confusing when we recite it in church, to be honest, which we do every now and then. We regularly have to explain in that line, we actually mean the church all over the world. That's what we mean by
So
Catholic.
in a sense, it's somewhat marketing. The Roman Catholic Church calling themselves Catholic is like, I don't know. Well, maybe let's not get into that. But it does seem very, very clever of them to adopt that phrase. Or maybe I don't know. Anyway, I don't know enough about it. All right. So we've got CCR 2, Pauline epistles, and CCR 11, Acts. Before we get to that, I'm really interested in Leviticus. So because that's more my wheelhouse. So CCR 7, Leviticus. Yeah. And maybe this is a question for all of these, right? The Gospels. I want you to make this really clear to the audience. Can somebody come along and say, Kim has discovered the original Gospels that were written by the disciples, or he's published them, maybe not discovered them, in CCR 1 because they're in the same dialect that Jesus spoke, right? That's not at all what you're saying, right?
No, I'm not saying that at all. These are all translations from Greek. All of them, without exception, including the Leviticus.
Do you have, and I know I'm putting you on the spot, are there some proofs you have of that? Or is that just the assumption because we know it was written in Greek, or we believe it was written in Greek?
Yeah, well, no, I can give that. It is slightly on the spot, so I might give in a few minutes to think.
No, that's come totally up with fair.
Better example.
So
just on the spot, though, hang on, just on the spot.
Yeah, sure.
There are two characters in the New Testament called Jesus. The famous one and the less famous one.
Who's the famous one?
The famous. How else we meant to distinguish?
No, fair enough. You mean Jesus of Nazareth, and then there's another one.
There is another minor figure called Jesus. Yeah. In Christian Palestinian Aramaic, you would expect somebody called Jesus to be called Yeshua or something of that sort.
Did they pronounce the ayin in Christian Palestinian Aramaic? Do we know?
Okay, no. So that's one of the distinguishing features actually of CPA. The so-called guttural letters Aleph, Ayin, Het, and Hey had become so weak and not distinctly pronounced that they started to be confused with each other. So we've got all sorts of words where we would expect a het, but we get an ayin, or we would expect an aleph, but we get a hey, and vice versa, and all that sort of thing.
There's a famous passage in the Talmud where it says you should never let a Jew, I want to say from Haifa and maybe Beit Shan or someplace like that, and Tivon maybe, as a bunch of several different places. You should never let them lead the prayers because they don't distinguish between aleph and ayin and hey and chet, right? So part of the dialect of I guess of Aramaic and maybe of whatever elements of Hebrew, like I mean, even when they're reading Hebrew in the prayers, they're not distinguishing between those guttural letters like we don't do today in many Israeli pronunciations. When I was in Ulpan in 1990, we were reading something about the death of Aaron, the brother of Moses. And one of the students read the text in Hebrew, and he said, Ol A'ar. And I raised my hand. I said, that's wrong. It's called Hol Ha'ar. And everybody looked at me like I was crazy. They're like, oh, no, we don't pronounce the hey. It's I'm like, but then you're saying aleph. Yeah, that's how we pronounce it. And I learned that some modern Israelis do pronounce the hey, and some pronounce it as an aleph. I mean, everybody pronounces it. But whether you distinguish between hey and aleph depends on your accent.
Sure. And if you listen to early, kind of from the 60s recordings of songs or newsreels or whatever, they're far more assiduous in pronouncing ayins and...
So there was actually a rule up until the 70s that required you to have a rolling R. And it was kind of like an in-joke among newscasters because nobody spoke that way. They're like, I go home and I don't talk that way. Wow. But I'm required to have a rolling R. And then they kind of dropped it sometime in the 70s. And you'll occasionally hear like a politician who still has a rolling R, but not so much anymore.
Or if you're speaking to somebody from, say, a Mizrahi type community, then
there's definitely people of Mizrahi or Sephardic descent who will say hayt and not chet, and will say ayn. Generally, though, you only hear that if somebody is trying to make it clear, meaning like somebody who isn't of Sephardic descent. Or even when they are, they'll generally only say the ayin when they're trying to distinguish between osho and osho, right, or something like that. Sure. Two words that otherwise are homonyms, unless you emphasize the pronunciation of the guttural letter. But then a second later, they won't pronounce it because it's not necessary for disambiguating. So
sure. It's incredible how a linguistic situation that is still very much around today, the pronunciation or otherwise of these gutturals, is exactly what we find back in these texts. And we've got just a plethora of evidence that those sorts of confusions were being made in Christian Palestinian Aramaic and in other dialects of Aramaic in Western Aramaic.
And I don't know the answer to this. In Syriac, do they pronounce the ayin, the letter ayin? In other words, do they call him Yeshua or do they call him Yeshua?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Or Yeshua.
My hunch, but again, this is a hunch based on later pronunciation, is that they are much more assiduous, in pronouncing the gutturals.
In Syria.
Yes. But as I say, that could be entirely anachronistic because I'm just hearing...
Right. It could be the influence of Arabic coming along and then they say, oh, we have the same letter with the same name.
Precisely, yes.
We'll pronounce it that way. And look, this is like when I speak, it's funny, when I speak Hebrew in Israel, I pronounce the reish. But if I'm talking to American Jews, then it's reish. Well, there is no ra and this is my, what do they call it, rhotic American accent. There is no ra in Hebrew, right? So where am I getting that? I'm getting it by analogy because it's considered to be the equivalent of the Hebrew reish, right? Even though it's not, right? They're two different letters, but R and Reish. But we've equated the two in, let's say, American Jewish pronunciation. So, all right, even though it's not obvious that you have to, right? And then when British Jews speak, boy, that's really interesting because they have non-rhotic. They don't pronounce, from our American perspective, they don't pronounce any R. Unless it's followed by a vowel. There's a whole bunch of rules there.
So you would end up saying things like shamar instead of shamal, and am I hearing or am I preserving or what am I doing here? Shamal.
So I once heard a British person. He was trying to explain logograms in like I don't know, Akkadian or something like that.
Uh-huh.
And he said it would be like if you have a symbol of an eye and you have a symbol of a deer, and that's idea.
Right. Okay.
And I'm like, no, that's idea, right? Which to me is not idea. But anyway, so the point is, within English, we have these differentiations, we have these distinctions, and then we have them in Aramaic. And so you're saying the ayin, right? So we have two letters, guys, aleph and ayin, and probably in ancient Hebrew we had three letters, but let's not get into that, right? Because you had ayin and rayin. But like I said, let's not get into that. So in Christian Palestinian Aramaic, in CCR 1, 7, 2, and 11, they're not pronouncing the ayin. So what do they call Jesus?
Oh yeah, that's right. That's what we were talking about originally.
Yeah.
Well,
the famous one. What do they call the famous one from Nazareth?
They call him, and this
or
is
Bethlehem,
this is a bit surprising actually. They call him Jesus. In other words, they take the Greek word and they write it in Aramaic letters. And that's kind of one dead giveaway that they were looking at Greek manuscripts when they were translating. Because they don't call him the name that his mother would have called him.
What would she have called him? Everybody listening.
Presumably something like Yeshua or something like that. Actually, do you know what? I think my colleague Ben Cantor has a YouTube video on the pronunciation of Jesus in the first century.
We'll put a link to that. We've had him on the program too. Amazing information he has.
There we go. Yeah. And I think that's precisely what he discusses there. So he'll answer far better. But yeah, so that's not what. So whenever they're talking about the famous Jesus, his name is written as Jesus. In other words, the Greek name written.
And what about the non-famous Jesus? What do they call him?
He gets called Yeshua with an iron. But yeah, so there's a distinction. Yeah.
All right, so I'm gonna read here from the NRSV, and Jesus, who is called Justice, greets you. And this is my Israeli Greek pronunciation. Jesus hologomenos Justos, right? So Jesus, who is called Justos, right? So it's in other words, there was somebody named Yeshua. What would justice be in Hebrew? I don't even know. Yeshua Yehoshaphat or something like that, maybe. I don't know.
So which verse are we in here now?
That's Colossians 4:11. So read that for us if you can. I'm pretty sure you can.
Okay, so yeah, Kai Jesus hologomenos Justos, saying Jesus, the one called Justice.
And what do we have in the Pshita?
In the Pshita, we've got the Yeshu, how the mythkare Justos, which is justice, and Jesus, who is called Justice.
So that's interesting. Here we have, I can see we have the Yud Shin Vav Ayin. It's not Jesus. It's with now whether they pronounce the Ayin or not. That I guess we don't really know. That's what we're talking. Is up to debate. But in Christian Palestinian Aramaic, instead of an Ayin here, and instead of a Shin, you're going to have something like a Samach or something. I guess.
No. Well, let me show you. If I can share my screen,
yes,
then
please.
I can show you
Go ahead, share. This is exciting stuff. Look, this is the kind of thing that the average listener doesn't get access to. If they downloaded this book, they wouldn't understand most of it.
Sure.
And to have the editor of this book explain it to us is such a privilege. Thank you so much, Kim. This is amazing.
Oh, it's a real honor to do so. So thank you. So here is Colossians 4:11 in Christian Palestinian Aramaic, and there you can see the Yeshu with written in exactly the same way as in the Peshita. Hodein the mithamar Justus. Hodein, this one, the mithamar, who was known as Justice. So
we've got 5-letter there in the name Jesus. Can you break down and tell the audience? I don't know if you can highlight it. Do you have that or something?
Let's have a look. Yeah, I'm probably
highlight each letter and tell them what they are. So
I can even. I'll zoom in a bit. There we go. Now we can really see.
Oh, nice.
So this is a vowel. That's just and. This is a yod. So ya, sh, u.
So it's another vav, or they call wow, I guess. In
Syria. Yeshu, and then this Yeshua.
So that's the ayin.
Ayin. Yeah, there we go.
Okay. So
now I don't want to get into too much detail, but I will just say that I had to write this book using Syriac script. This is not not identical to the script that Christian Palestinian Aramaic is written in, but it's close enough.
Do you have
an
an image of that you can show us this particular word, or is that too complicated? I know I'm putting you on the spot here.
I have.
And again, this is the less famous Jesus, who's known as Justice. In fact, the text itself has to tell us, guys, this isn't the one you guys know about. It's the one known as Justice.
So the page that I'm showing here, I deliberately chose because it's one of the hardest pages to see anything written underneath. So the text that you can see here written in dark brown is the Syriac text of John Climacus.
We don't see that. We still see the book.
Sorry. Okay,
the nice
so
typeset, beautiful book.
Yeah. Okay. So let me share, and you'll be able to see.
Okay. Guys, it's exciting. We're going to see a real palimpsest.
There we go. Can you see that now?
I can see it. Okay. So that's not the what is it? Estrangela script. That's a different script. Okay.
So this script, yeah. So what we're seeing here in dark brown, as I say, is the upper level text written in.
Oh, that's the from the around the year 1000. Okay.
Roughly, yeah. So, and as I say, I chose this page to show precisely because it's really difficult to see what's written underneath. So I wanted to show off how the multispectral imaging has really helped us. But if you just look here, you can. I'll zoom in so that you can see something a little bit more. Now, if you look here, can you see that there's a script underneath that you can see in very, very light brown?
Wow. Yeah.
So you can see a letter there. That's probably a bet. You can see a letter here with a diagonal stroke there. You can see a letter here that looks like a square, but it's got a little roof off to the left. You can see a wow there. That is the Christian Palestinian Aramaic undertext. That's what we needed to recover. But as I'll zoom out again so you can see.
And although the undertext is in some form of Syriac script, it's not Syriac. It's again, not Syriac. It's Western Western Aramaic, CPA, Christian Palestinian Aramaic. Okay.
Exactly right. Yeah.
And Palestine here refers to the land of Israel, the Roman province of Palestine.
Yes, precisely.
Not to an ethnic group called Palestinians. Am I right about that?
Not to an no.
Not necessarily, at least.
Not necessarily. Well, it's.
I don't want to get you in trouble. Not necessarily. Let's say.
Okay, sure. It's referring to the Roman nomenclature for the region. Yeah.
Okay. Which after Hadrian was called Syria Palestina or something like that.
There we go. Yeah. So it's purely that. Okay. There's not related to anything.
And it's interesting. Today. Just the other day, I was looking with Nelson at an article we were looking for an article by Barasher that ChatGPT told me about, and it turned out it made up the article. It doesn't exist. Oh. But I ended up looking at everything from Moshe Barasher, who's the head of the Academy of the Hebrew Language, that I could find at least. And he has an article and it's in Hebrew. It's called Surit Eretz Yisraelit or something like that.
Eretz Yisrael. Yeah, that's right.
Right. But in English it was translated as Palestinian Syriac or something like that. And I'm like, wait, I'm sure that's not correct. Yeah, no, Syro-Palestinian, that's what it was called. Instead of Palestinian Syriac, maybe? I'm not sure. How would you translate that?
Well, Barasher wrote his PhD on this dialect of Aramaic. So I don't know if that's what you were getting to. But
no, it was an article that obviously came out of the PhD. It wasn't the whole PhD.
Okay.
It was something on JSTOR that we were looking at.
Okay, yeah. So the Hebrew language name for this dialect of Aramaic is Surit Shel Eretz Yisrael, the Syriac of the land of Israel.
There you go. Any final words? Guys, go download this book. We're going to put the link on nehemiaswall.com. That also helps Kim because, this is how scholars or maybe the publishers decide, hey, if we had a lot of downloads of this, let's do more of this research because apparently people are interested in it. So guys, this is worth downloading. It's a free download. Share it with your friends. Even if you don't understand most of it, hopefully you can understand some of it. Because look, some of it is in Syriac, but there's also, in Christian Palestinian Aramaic.
Not Syriac.
The Syriac. Is it correct to call it the Syriac script, or would that even be right in this context?
Yeah, no, it would exactly be right because, and this just comes down to modern typography. There is a typescript for Christian Palestinian Aramaic, but it's very difficult to get hold of. And so most people who are writing about Christian Palestinian Aramaic just use the Syriac script, as I've done. just to cut out all of the.
So
all of the
I hope
difficulties.
next time when you come on this program in the future, you'll explain what some of those differences are between CPA script and Syriac script, because that's fascinating as well. But guys, there's so much. I only was able to peruse the book, and there are so many interesting things that popped out that hopefully we'll have Kim back. Let us know if you want to hear more about this, and we'll do a future episode about it. There's so much Kim can talk about. Guys, if you remember, Kim is the expert who identified manuscripts written by Samuel ben Jacob, the same scribe as the Leningrad Codex. That's what we had him on in the past. And here he's a polymath. He's doing Christian Palestinian Aramaic, and he's doing the Leningrad Codex and identifying the handwriting. It's amazing stuff, guys. I hope you come back on. Thank you, Kim, for your research and for sharing. Any final words for the audience?
Thank you. No, I'm really grateful for your interest and your enthusiasm, and so thank you for all that you're doing through your podcast to make all of these sorts of things more accessible to people for whom otherwise they'd just be a closed book. So,
amen. Well, thank you so much. Thanks for being on the program. Shalom.
Thanks. Bye.
All right. So underneath there's a text, and you're using multispectral imaging to try to decipher this.
That's right. Yeah. So, and I can take you through a little bit of how that would work, actually, if that would be helpful.
Can you show us the name Yeshua, even though it's referring to justice?
I can't on this page because this isn't the right page. But if you give me a few minutes, I can find that image as well.
No. Show us what you have here. Actually, if you could do that, that would be amazing. That would be very cool.
Okay, yeah, all right. So in that case, just give me a moment and I'll bring that image up now.
I think that would be much more engaging for the audience to see what the name Jesus would have looked like if it had come from an Aramaic itself as opposed to going through the Greek intermediary. Actually, if you can show us Jesus as well, I think that's also quite interesting.
You have been listening to Hebrew Voices with Nehemia Gordon. Thank you for supporting Nehemia's Makor Hebrew Foundation. Learn more at nehemiaswall.com.